we are now entering the last part of our program, and we are moving towards the end of the program. I want to bring on stage a very important and crucial perspective within AI and the rule of law, the perspective of people who operate very much at the front line of AI governance. And they won't say that, I will say that for them, that I think oftentimes may feel lonely operating at the front line of AI governance. And these people are judges. So let me hand over to Mr. Prateek Sibal, the program specialist at UNESCO, for what also promises to be a very informative session with the two judges, the Honorable Isabela Ferrari, federal judge in Brazil, and the Honorable Lilian Itemba from the High Court of Tanzania. Prateek, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nico. And it's really always a pleasure to be at the Athens Roundtable, because I always hear things that we already need to do, and everything is urgent. And capacity building was one of the issues that, since past 2 or 3 roundtables has been coming around. And if you remember, in 2021, we launched a survey of judicial operators worldwide at the Athens Roundtable to ask them, what is it that they think is important in terms of capacity building for them? And there were 2 priorities that they identified. And this was launched through the UNESCO network, where we have around 23,000 judicial operators worldwide. They identified 2 priorities. One was the use of AI within the justice system itself. There is huge case burdens and the challenges of access to justice. And then with COVID, suddenly things changed and courts became virtual. And then what are the challenges of that and AI, and whether a real in-person hearing is the same as a virtual hearing, and what are the legal challenges in terms of the principles of justice and so on. So there were a lot of issues that came up, including then on what are the broader legal implications of AI when we talk about facial recognition technologies, recommender algorithms, and so on. So building on this survey of about 1,200 judicial operators from 100 countries, UNESCO with the Future Society, with the National Judicial College, IEEE, and other partners, CETIC.br in Brazil, worked to develop a MOOC. And we are proud to have Judge Isabela Ferrari, who was a lecturer in the MOOC as well, and Judge Lilian Itemba, who was a participant and also a trainer in Tanzania for a recent training that we did. So Judge Ferrari, you've been talking about bias in the judiciary and AI-driven biases and the algorithmic biases that we talk about. So what are some of the challenges that you see within the judiciary related to algorithmic biases, and how are judges working to address that? What are some of the tools, practical methods that they are using? And also, please talk about the Brazilian context, because I think a lot of work is happening in Brazil, so we'd love to learn about that as well. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Prateek. It's a pleasure to be here once more. So the first thing I need to mention are the algorithmic decision systems, ADS. Algorithmic decision systems are a trend in Brazil. They are a present trend in Brazil, and they are a future trend. They appear to be a future trend for many legal systems. But what are, in the end of the day, algorithmic decision systems? They are basically algorithms that suggest courses of actions to judges and judicial operators, such as they help you decide what to do in a bail situation, they help suggesting legislation for judges, they help identifying parallel lawsuits, for example. But the point is, these algorithmic decision systems, they might be biased. When the systems are biased, when algorithmic systems are biased, we talk about algorithmic bias. But for me, the main point is that the origin of algorithmic bias is human bias, because the algorithmic mathematical basis is neutral. And what we need to notice is that bias comes inside algorithms during its training. But how does that happen? This happens basically on 2 different ways. So there are 2 doors to bias in algorithms. The first one is data, and the second one is the programming. So when the data is biased, when the data they are fed with is biased, algorithms, they become biased because they're going to identify and replicate this bias. And imagining a situation in which data is biased is not difficult because we live in the midst of a biased society. So, for example, if I want to decide situations regarding bail and I use previous decisions from judges that are biased in some situations, if we think about Brazil, we could think about racial bias, we could think about gender bias. So if the decisions that I use to train the algorithm are biased, the algorithm will become a biased algorithm. But more than that, we also have bias that exists in society. So if you use big data, for example, and if you do not pay attention, if big data is biased, so will be the algorithm trained based on big data. And the second door to bias is the programming. When we talk about AI and non-programming algorithms, of course, what the programmer does is not as much as they do in programmed algorithms. When we use AI, we let AI learn by itself. But there are some decisions that the programmer takes, which we call hyperparameters, and we might have problems in the hyperparameters. And to explain that, I'm going to use an example that is not a legal example, but just to make things clear for everyone who is listening to us. So let's imagine I am the CEO of a chain of universities, and I want to hire good professors for my universities. And there are a lot of candidates, so I want to use an algorithm to help me pre-select these candidates. So I'm going to hire a programmer and I'm going to ask him to develop a software that is able to choose good professors. What will this person do? It will translate my demand, good professors, I want to find good professors, into something the algorithm can understand, because good professors is not something the algorithm can understand. And if we decide, me and him or he, if we decide to translate this need into like something like a good professor is a professor that publishes a lot. So let's imagine we do this translation so that the algorithm can understand. Why am I bringing this example? Because in Brazil, we need a search that showed that in the pandemics, the academic production of men has raised, whereas the academic production of women has decreased a lot. So if I translate good professor into professors that have published a lot in this near past, I might have an algorithm a software that has a gender bias. So these are the two doors we can think about: programming and training. So if I would, the match has just started. I don't know if you're hearing the noise. It's this. But if I would put everything I wanted to tell judges that are listening to us regarding algorithmic decision systems and their concerns in a nutshell, I would say, first, trained algorithms might not be neutral. So we must be aware when we adopt it in the judiciary. Second, algorithmic bias has a human origin. So we must look before using algorithmic decision systems, we must look at the data they're fed with, and we must look at the choices that were made during their programming. And third, judges must be especially attentive. The judicial field deals with sensitivities. The judicial field deals with core values of our society. We're deciding on a daily basis on people's freedom, people's family, people's property. So we must be aware to this very important topic.
Thanks, Judge Ferrari. Always lucid and clear. Judge Itemba, I just wanted to come to you. So we've been talking about in conversations at the Athens Roundtable around legal frameworks and standards, and how can judicial practices be aligned to those? And you've been also a trainer in Tanzania. What are some of the challenges that you saw in terms of judicial capacity building? over there, and how can international judge-to-judge, peer-to-peer learning help address that as well? So over to you, Judge Itemba. And we are running short of time, so 4 minutes max. Yeah.
Prateek, and thank you for inviting me into this roundtable. Yes, what you have said, it's very important for the judges to have this kind of capacity building, and especially on artificial intelligence and governance, because it's a new field, it's a new area, and everyone is learning every day. And specifically for judges and magistrates, just like Judge Isabela has just mentioned, that it's a very, I mean, the nature of work which we're doing is sensitive, because we're dealing with people's rights, and their data protection is very important. Their information should be secured. So we should always know how to use artificial intelligence to interpret it in our work, how to use it, and to what extent shall we use it, so that it can help the judges to improvise their work and not to jeopardize their work, to make sure that the judge's work is easier, but then the artificial intelligence is not becoming a risk in terms of data, because we've been hearing people talking about the security of data, and people will be fearing, like, what about our information? What about this and that? But then once the judges knows what artificial intelligence can do to help them, it's easier to be confident and to be to trust the system and to be confident in using it, and to share with others as well. Specifically in Tanzania, where we are still in the process of implementing, using artificial intelligence, as we can hear from Judge Isabela from Brazil, that they have advanced in using artificial intelligence. Also in New Zealand, for example, in other countries, I know people have been using artificial intelligence in several stages, but then that will be important for us as Tanzanian judges as well, to hear from other judges, like you have mentioned, Prateek, like peer-to-peer exchange of experience, exchange of information. What are the challenges and what can be improved there? For example, now in Tanzania, we are having the software which can be used by judges to interpret court proceedings and to transcribe court proceedings. That, I think, is a very good starting point, because from there we can build on other activities which can be done. But then once we test this software, now we are talking about NLP, the natural language processing, which have to be applied there. And I'm sure there will be some challenges in the first stages in terms of applying it. And then when we hear from other judges from other countries, how they are doing it and how they've overcome the challenges, that will be very useful for us as a country. So, for example, UNESCO have been training us as judges and magistrates, and that has been very useful to open our mind on things which can happen, and so that even when we come to, because I'm sure when we will start using artificial intelligence fully in our country, we'll also need to create new rules and regulations instead of the one which we were having, which we are reflecting maybe the manual work which we were having in our country. So the new rules and regulations which will be in place will need to learn from others. How did they do, so that we can also be in a better position, because once you know what artificial intelligence is in terms of judicial proceedings, then it's easier to regulate it, unless otherwise it will be very difficult. So I find it very important to have capacity building.
Thank you so much, Judge Itemba. And I see Nico is already here, so that's a nice prompt always. Nico appearing on the screens. But just to kind of conclude, I think it's really important to have this peer-to-peer exchanges, and at the Athens Roundtable we endeavor to do that. And as a follow-up, we are also setting up a working group on judicial capacity building, where we are developing a global toolkit, because it's not only important to reach individual judges, but reach institutions. So this is what we will work with you all. And thank you so much for your thoughts here. we have taken note and we continue to reinforce our work on judicial capacity building with respect to AI. Over to you, Nico.
Thanks a lot, Prateek, and thanks a lot, Judge Ferrari and Judge Itemba. As you beautifully said, you are the guardians of our rights and our liberties. And as a result, society has a moral obligation to support you with the capacity that you need so that you can discharge these duties loyally and respectfully. Probably if I had another career in my life, I think I would probably have I've tried to follow the judicial journey. So congratulations, thanks for your leadership, and hopefully see you next year.